Welcome back to another installment of one of this channel's staple series. Following the trend of last time where we pick a main 6 to focus creepypastas on, today we'll be focusing on spooky stories based on Fluttershy. Are these stories going to be great, or are they going to be complete garbage, which would actually be fitting for such a trash pony like Fluttershy? But I shall remain impartial. Let's find out. Starting with our first story, Rabbit Stew. A Fluttershy creepypasta titled Rabbit Stew. Gee, I wonder where this is headed. Is this story going to be about Fluttershy mentally snapping and cooking up Angel and eating him? Or is this going to be something new and original? Well, if you guessed the latter, new and original, I want whatever you're on. Let's give this a read. Angel Bunny once again had risen from his seat and knocked on the door, which led to Fluttershy's room. The door led to a room? As in the door magically sprung to life, put on a top hat, and gave you a tour leading you to Fluttershy's room? Obviously not, so what was wrong with just simply knocked on the door to Fluttershy's room? I get you want to add some flair to the way you describe things, but this just seems to me like an example of purple prose. Obviously not an extreme example of it, but we're definitely getting there. Well, the story lets us know that Fluttershy had locked herself in her room for 7 days straight, not feeding her animals or anything, causing them to, quote, scavenge food for themselves. And honestly, with how much she coddles them in the show, it is actually quite disturbing to think of a scenario where she stops doing that and all her animal friends go feral, which could be a really cool bouncing off point to play with the sense of betrayal and all that. But rather than exploring that genuinely cool concept, the story goes on with, or the obvious fact that she hadn't come out of her room for 7 days straight now. There was something deeply troubling the mayor, which kind of breaks any serious tension there was in the story so far. On one hand, you've got this cool idea that's a logical result of Fluttershy being so depressed, or whatever she's going through here, that she's neglecting her pets. But no, you'd rather shift focus on breaking immersion by saying, or the obvious fact, and thus highlighting the suspension of disbelief pushing happenings of not leaving your room for 7 days straight. Well, it looks like you haven't left your room in 7 days straight. Touché. But okay, my point was, we could have let that obvious fact a bit more in the background to perhaps give more detail on how her yard now has overgrown weeds, or how some of her predator pets have reverted to wild instincts and resorted to eating her prey pets. But instead of all that surrounding context to ground this story better, you want to immediately glue our attention on perhaps the most outlandish part of the story, if you insist. But if you're going to be saying something as excessive as Fluttershy staying in her room with no food or water or anything like that for a whole week, and you're highlighting that fact over and over again, I expect the payoff for the reason behind that to match the extremity of what's going on here. Well, Fluttershy invites Angel into her room, and we get this big reveal.
You know, Angel, I was just thinking about how no one seems to care about me anymore. Everyone just seems to push around and take advantage of my so-called kindness.
That's it! That's like the most generic reason one could come up with for... I mean, I get when you're trying to turn a character from a little kid's show into a creepypasta killer thing. You only have so much material to work with, but... You know what? We'll see where this goes. Because you know what? Maybe things are gonna get a little better, because I've got to give props to this next part. Angel directed his gaze toward Fluttershy's stomach, her ribs much more apparent without days of eating. That's actually quite a disturbing piece of imagery, which is far more than I can give lazier writings that leave descriptors like hyper-realistic. And it actually shows us some consequence of Fluttershy not eating for 7 days. I'm glad we get that depressing sort of imagery along with it, rather than just leaving it as Fluttershy hadn't eaten for 7 days. Good job. See, I can be positive. However, what's not good job is how the next part is a quote, but the author neglected to put a closing quote at the end of the dialogue. Fantastic. Not? Well, as the title of the story gave away, Fluttershy only baited Angel into the room just to turn him into Rabbit Stew, but not before we get some gross torturing. Fluttershy squeezed Angel so hard his eyes were practically bulging out of his head. He felt like his was about to explode from all the blood rushing up to his skull. This was just the beginning though. Wow, I'm glad the narrator let us know that this was just the beginning. I would have been so lost if the story just kept progressing without the narrator stopping to tell us there's more stuff that's about to happen. Not stupid. Although, it seems as though, with how much the story focuses on Angel's torment and the story giving us this imagery, his skin fur, and the rest of his insides were completely eroded off of his body, leaving him just a carcass. It feels like the author just really didn't like Angel in the actual show and wanted to take it out on him this way as catharsis. And if that was the reason, that pretty much excuses giving Fluttershy such a non-original motivation for all this. Although at that point, I wish this would have been aimed towards opalescence. And after that, Fluttershy heads over to the kitchen and makes rabbit stew out of Angel. And I don't really understand this part. Fluttershy squeaked.
I have so much stew. Why not share it with my good friends?
Fluttershy clopped to her room, getting to share her concoction with her closest friends. She washed her mane and coat, be ridding of all the blood covering her. She laughed maniacally when her cottage doorbell rang, but regained most of her composure. She smiled innocently when she welcomed Rarity, Pinkie Pie, and Rainbow Dash inside her cottage. Okay, so she makes the stew, thinks she should share it with her friends, and her friends magically show up? Well, that's convenient. There's zero mention of her inviting her friends or anything like that. In fact, she was covered in blood up until the point of her friends showing up. Now, I like the idea of a slasher villain kind of thing cleaning up bloodstains to reintegrate into society to continue being an imposter among them. So this could have actually played with that idea of Fluttershy cleaning up all those stains, going into Ponyville to find her friends, along with her maybe getting some kind of sick thrill from how nobody around her suspects her of what she just did. But no! It just has this instead!
Hello, you guys. Won't you come in?
She greeted warmly. Gee, Flutters, it's been a while since we've seen you, Rainbow exclaimed.
Oh, you know me. Busy, busy, busy with all these animals.
Fluttershy laughed. Rarity suddenly wore a frown on her face. Fluttershy, darling, have you been taking care of yourself lately? You have bags under your eyes and you look like you haven't eaten in ages. Who, me? As I've said before, I've been working myself to the bone lately. Haha. Fluttershy laughed awkwardly. Enough with the chit-chat and let's eat, Pinkie shouted. Fluttershy sprouted a devilish grin on her face as she walked off to the kitchen to pour her and her friend some delicious stew. First of all, use paragraphs and adjectives and nouns. Second of all, you're telling me that none of her friends bothered checking up on her all week? Judging by how this story said earlier that Fluttershy was tired of being kicked around, this could have been expanded to making her friends secretly hate her, which would have given us some reason for her friends not checking up on her earlier, but we know this isn't the case, judging by Rarity's reaction of genuine concern here. Go off, I guess. We're almost done anyway. As the four ponies began to eat their stew, only Fluttershy's face was adorned with a smile. Finishing hers first, Fluttershy put her bowl down. So, do you all just love it? Fluttershy exclaimed. Well, it's interesting to say the least. What kind of soup is this exactly? Rarity questioned.
Rabbit stew,
Fluttershy whispered. Pinkie Pie, Rarity, and Rainbow Dash all gasped in response. Okay, so you'll never guess how this ends. No, you actually probably won't, because there's one sentence left after this, and it might be the stupidest attempt at a shock ending I've ever read, at least in a while. In a split second, Fluttershy slit all three of their throats. Like, really? The story so far started with Fluttershy doing something that could kind of realistically happen. I mean, Angel is a much weaker creature than a freaking pony, and there was also some sort of logical, mental reason for Fluttershy to be feeling this way. But then we get a sudden shift to her having superpowers like this? Man? Okay, so what a story. I just want to say from a literary standpoint, the word Fluttershy appears 40 times in the span of 1,360 words, which is roughly 9% of the entire story. Do we not know how to use pronouns and descriptors? But from a story standpoint, based on the fact that this was written in 2014, and these types of stories were no doubt popular back then, this was probably just a young person's attempt at trying to write one of them. So I'm not actually angry at it. It's just too bad there's nothing too novel or unique about this one. And I guess the reason I am actually sort of frustrated with the story in particular is because, like I said, there were genuinely really cool concepts that the author could have expanded on. And that's not an assessment I can give for most stories we've covered thus far. But that's it for that one. Moving on. Fluttershy's Rage. This one is a very early story, it seems, having been written back in 2013. And this one starts with an author's note. Hi, Digital Brony here again to bring you my next creepypasta. I bring you Fluttershy's Rage. Creative right, :P. I rushed this a bit due to my schedule, but hopefully you won't hate too much. So without further ado, let the pasta begin. Okay, first of all, if you're going to be sarcastic towards your own story by saying creative right, have you considered adjusting the premise of your story, or at least the title, so you can't do that to yourself? And secondly, why would you tell your audience that it's rushed? The only reason you would self-deprecate like that is if you wanted people to read this and go, no, it's not that bad, don't be so hard on yourself. Or, wow, this is really good for being rushed, which could work. if the story was actually decent. On the other hand, this would be to kind of, put up an excuse as to why your work may not be that great. But if you're aware of that, can't you go back and edit things to actually be better? I get the author says he was on a tight schedule, but at that point, the story itself could have been left shorter. It's like, would you rather have a long story where it's mid all the way through, or a short story that's actually very strong all the way through? Probably the second one. Though, okay, emphasis on probably. I get that if you do want to try your hand at writing longer stories, there's nothing wrong with that. There's always pros and cons, hence why I said probably, not definitely. But I guess my point here is that all this author's note really provides at the end of the day is it calling attention to itself, inviting you to criticize it, or at least admitting self-defeat before you actually get to start the story, and making you look through the story with that lens. As in, if that thing wasn't there, I'd be able to see this more objectively, but if that's the vibe you want us to start the story off with, I mean, sure. But that's enough preamble. Let's start with the story. Basically, this one starts with the most cliched opening you'd see in a story like this.
Everyone in Ponyville knows about Fluttershy, how she is a loving and caring friend, how she is the element of kindness, and how she cares for and helps animals, big or small. But when you go to her cottage and she doesn't answer when you knock, don't think that she is out somewhere, finding hurt animals, or hanging out with her friends. That is exactly what she wants you to think. This true story tells you what she is doing when she doesn't answer your knock at the door. It was a bright and sunny day in Ponyville, and
Okay, not only is this completely unoriginal, but I also think it's worth comparing and contrasting this with the opening of the last story, where it didn't have this sort of introduction at all. Rabbit Stew just puts us straight into the action of Angel checking up on Fluttershy, whereas this one spent some time setting things up on who Fluttershy is and what she's doing before the creepy stuff ends up happening. And frankly, even though I did go really rough on Rabbit Stew, I actually appreciate the abrupt start to that story since it adds to the unsettling uncanniness of the mystery of what's going on. Unlike this one. But speaking of Angel, this story also involves him, as the story says Twilight visited Fluttershy just to hear screaming coming from the basement, which she goes to check out to see that Angel was using a small scalpel to slowly cut off the cutie mark of Vinyl Scratch, who seemed almost dead, as if on some type of anesthetic drug. Yeah, that doesn't actually seem too out of character for him. It's called fentanyl. It's about 75 times stronger than morphine, said Fluttershy, now behind her, as if reading Twilight's mind. What is that? And follow-up question, can I have some? Okay, obviously it's a misspelling of fentanyl, but that doesn't stop it from sounding like it's talking about fentanyl mixed with feta cheese. But anyway, Fluttershy uses that on Twilight, knocking her out, and she awakes tied up to a rope. How original! And this is so original that the rest of the story is basically cupcakes, but with Fluttershy and Twilight rather than Pinky and Dashy. And this next part, I think I'm just gonna have to let the story speak for itself.
You have very beautiful teeth, Twilight.
Wrong too.
That they're coming out of your mouth, said Fluttershy in a crazed voice. She then stopped after pulling 6 teeth out and started to cut into Twilight's Achilles, causing blood to leak out onto the floor and form a pool of blood. Screamed Twilight, feeling every bit of pain that Fluttershy put her through.
As opposed to only feeling some of the pain?
Shut up! Yelled Fluttershy, and she cut Twilight's lips off.
But as if that weren't enough, before the story ends, we get Fluttershy also sewing Twilight's mouth shut, cutting her horn, using said horn to hack her ears off, stating,
making sure that she could feel every hack and slice.
And like I said with the similar prose from earlier, as opposed to only feeling some of the pain? I get that rhetorically, this is trying to make you, as the reader, feel the drawn-out torture that Twilight is feeling. And yeah, slowing down and saying every blah 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 does make your mind dwell on considering the physical repercussions of what's going on, rather than just theoretically understanding something's going on before speedily moving on to the next thing. But narratively, it doesn't really gel. And speaking of not really gelling, the next scene is Fluttershy leaving and coming back 30 minutes later with Aloysius, spelt wrong by the way, with the implication that he was secretly in on whatever the heck Fluttershy's been doing. And no, I don't know why this is in bullet point form, but what I do know is that this is the most out of left field turn the story could have possibly taken. He doesn't even do anything after he shows up, since Fluttershy just ends Twilight right there and then. I honestly thought that when he showed up, the story was gonna head towards it turning out that Fluttershy bird-napped him, which would have been a really clever callback to A Bird in the Hoof, and to also torture Aloysius in front of Twilight to break her down psychologically, on top of the physical stuff she's being put through. But no! He doesn't even get a whoo dialogue in this thing. I mean, okay, this thing could have been pretty good if it was mentioned that Fluttershy decided to feed Aloysius some of Twilight's organs, tying back to this dialogue from the beginning of the story, where the only reason Twilight visited Fluttershy in the first place was to ask her what she should feed Aloysius. But what's it matter now? The story comes to a close with,
I should do this more often,
chimed Fluttershy as she started ripping out Twilight's lungs. After she ripped out Twilight's lungs, she stopped gutting her. She untied her from the pole, picked up Twilight's body, and threw it over where Vinyl's body lied.
Now that she's dead, who am I gonna kill next?
Yes. Where is Pinkie Pie? How do you go from Vinyl Scratch to Twilight to Pinkie? That's not even in alphabetical order. All right. As for my thoughts on this one, I'll keep it short because this is obviously just a ripoff of Cupcakes that doesn't add anything too profound. Therefore, I don't see why I should over-reciprocate effort in terms of analysis. One standout sentence for me was,
Fluttershy, however, stared with pride as she watched her pet slowly kill the wub-loving pony.
I know I begged the previous story to, use some adjectives and stuff rather than just using names over and over again, but I don't think wub-loving is exactly vocabulary that matches the vibe of what this piece is trying to go for. If anything, that sounds a bit troll-ish that I wonder what the intent of using that term even was. I'm guessing it was to show the reader that the author was in the know with fandom lingo at the time.
She's great, right? A roommate who does the dishes. Only one problem. She cleans them with wubs.
But it just kind of backfires on the story because of how out of place it reads. This is more like something you'd see in a troll pasta, but speaking of, Fluttershy's lullaby. So this one, I only picked it out because it has the word Fluttershy in the title. And truth be told, and like I just alluded to, this is a troll pasta rather than a serious attempt at a grimdark. But we'll circle back to that later. Let's just get this started. The story features an unnamed protagonist whose parents are away on vacation. Let's just call him Leon, like the author's username. So Leon says, it was 8 p.m. and I was just getting done watching Adventure Time when my power went out for a while, about 30 minutes. I sat there and played my 3DS until the power came back on. I was a little mad that I had missed the new annoying orange, but I still had it recorded on my box. Crisis averted. Okay, jokes aside, we can already tell this story is trying to make itself not serious, which is, I'm pretty sure what makes for an effective troll pasta is if you start the story sounding serious, but then you suddenly shift things at the end to be ridiculous after hooking the reader on. Starting the story with that is just, how is that trolling? Because if you start off a troll pasta being jokey, then you're basically saying, hey, spoiler alert, this entire thing is a joke, so don't waste your time reading it, when you yourself actually wrote out the rest of it. If you want to waste people's time as the joke, you should probably start the story off sounding serious until you hook them to make sure that the reader doesn't realize they just wasted their time until the very end. Leon goes on to relate, okay, actually, I have no idea what this sentence, so I went to watch it. When right above it, there was another show. It's supposed to mean. I'm assuming it means a recorded My Little Pony rather than Annoying Orange, using context clues, but this sentence by itself makes zero sense. I was a little mad that I had missed the new Annoying Orange, but I still had it recorded on my box, so I went to watch it when right above it, there was another show. Don't you mean, over it, not right above? Yeah, I get that if you're writing a troll pasta, you may as well put in nonsensical sentences like that, but I only point this out because that's like the only sentence in this entire story that's worded weird, that it makes me think that the author actually didn't know how to phrase what was happening. Let's just move on to the plot. So Leon puts on the recording of the episode, but it starts with a commercial saying, go away, which he ignores. And the episode is basically the episode Stairmaster, except slightly different. And it gets to the point where Fluttershy is about to sing the lullaby for the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and hey, despite utilizing the typical creepypasta cliches in order to make this a troll pasta, this seems like, if nothing else, it's gonna be an episode of the show with a cool, fun little creepy twist. Because it hasn't been doing the worst job at taking what's familiar and slowly replacing it with sinisterness to slowly ramp up the horrors that are about to unfold. Thus, there's some interesting ideas here for what it is. I wonder what's next.
Hush now.
The screen flashed the dead body of a young child with a red bow in her hair. It was Apple Baboom as a human, but she had her throat slit and her eyes pulled out. Well, that escalated quickly. I couldn't look, but that song carried on.
Quiet now.
Bang! A gunshot went off and with it, another dead body. It was another female child that looked like Scootaloo. A brown-haired, skinny girl with tired treads over her body and 6 bullet holes where on her from head to toe. I sure do love how he says he couldn't look, but then proceeds to explain the image in great detail, noting that she specifically had 6 bullet holes. Although, I don't quite recall Scootaloo having brown hair. Unless he's saying that she's a brown girl who happened to be haired. As in, yeah, I'd imagine a female child to have hair. I almost fainted at the sight, but that's when she continued with the song.
It's time to lay your fleshy head.
And a loud scream filled the room. It was Sweetie Belle being gutted and killed by someone. Wow, she was gutted and killed? It's usually one or the other. Well, so the episode ends with Leon seeing his parents decapitated and hearts ripped out, with Fluttershy saying, "Don't cry, you are next after all." And the story ends with Leon being informed by his friend via phone call that he's to be sent to a foster home now that his parents were killed. How his friends knew this information is beyond me, but the cherry on top is...
A week later, I was sent to the foster home and then shown to my room, only to find a bed, a shelf, and a dresser with one other thing, a box with my name on it. I opened it and found a demented Fluttershy figure covered in blood with a note that said, "See you soon." I then knew I was next.
You know, despite being a troll pasta, I've actually got some serious thoughts on this. As in, if we go back to what the recorded episode contained, I don't know if the story was implying that the characters, like the dead girls, were based off of real people, or if the people responsible for the pictures just picked out victims that resembled the characters or what. But the thought of... Okay, I'm not saying the story was going here. I'm just saying this is like a thought the story gives me. So the thought of some super My Little Pony obsessed fan kidnapping little girls to dress them up as My Little Pony characters to live out his sick fantasies and eventually killing them is very, very disturbing. So if the story went that direction, this definitely had the potential to be the most disturbing story we've ever covered in the history of us doing this. But nah. What's with the stories we're covering today and some seriously interesting lost potential? Man, I guess my point is, especially with this one, there were some concepts that could have, you know, developed into an actual story with cool, I don't want to say the word concepts again, but cool concepts. Like, was Leon the only person to have witnessed this version of the episode? If there were others who saw it, were their parents also killed? What was the context of the pictures of the children in the episode? Was Hasbro aware of this happening? Like, all that's really... Like, there could have been some world building here, but nah. But on the topic of this being a troll, you know, I have a light on that was, you know, causing the background to be all orangish, but that thing turned off and I kind of got spooked recording this. Man, let's see how long that lasts. But back in character. But on topic of this being a troll pasta, I don't even get how this is a troll pasta. I get that it's trying to parody those overly gory shock flicks with no real substance besides dead children, just to go ahead and do that exact same thing. So I honestly put this in the same category as whatever it's trying to parody. But I get that because this was written in 2012, when these types of stories were rampant, maybe the goal was to try getting people to think this was another serious attempt at those. Or maybe there were just less people around noticing the pattern of how a lot of creepypastas just end up as the same thing. And this kind of troll pasta was novel for the time. But at that point, congratulations, what a fantastic use of your time. No matter how I really look at this, it seems like the only person getting trolled is the author of this. Next story. Fluttershy's cabin. Here we've got a story that was written incredibly recently, actually, as in 2024, by one The Hooded Man. Although I'm a little hesitant to go into background information for this story before covering the actual story like we usually do, so we'll circle back to this, you'll see why. For now, I'll just say it'll be interesting to see if there are any distinct evolutions from the typical classic grimdark fix we've covered thus far, seeing this one was written way after. Well, getting started, this one starts with an introduction.
Hello.
Salutations to you too, I guess. Why is that necessary?
This is a post documenting a supposed story posted during early to late 2015 named Fluttershy's Cabin. The user in question, OneDudeReviews_, has since deleted their account after several posts made about the story. However, various anonymous users managed to come forward with various archives of both the original thread on MLP forums as well as several contributions made by other users within said forum.
That's perfectly coherent without the greeting. What does hello add to that? Same with... Note, the user in question was known to have improper capitalizations as well as grammar at points. Any and all mistakes are kept intact to preserve the archived thread. Are you sure the person who wrote this story wasn't just terrible at writing and thought of an excuse for their typos? If so, that's actually kind of very smart and creative. But I doubt it, judging by how the opening blurb was perfectly fine, and this information would have been self-explanatory just by reading further on the story and using basic inference. So I don't know what the point of including this was here, besides for the author to call attention to the fact that they know that some people online type differently. That's like the same thing as making a pun and saying pun not intended. Just puts emphasis on a pun that you said that you claim isn't something to put emphasis on. So the story relays this user's post asking if anyone remembers a story with Fluttershy with weird eyes killing people in a cabin. And the story also relays a couple supposed responses to this post and actually shows some supposed screenshots of these. And you gotta love how the text doesn't even match up when you would think that would be like the easiest thing to fake a screenshot for. But hey, I still appreciate the effort. But speaking of these fake screenshots, somebody posts this in the thread and
It's unknown if there is more of the video available or if the screenshot is the only surviving instance. After Silver Tongue posted the screenshot, multiple users would respond with positive comments thanking Silver for finding the screenshot as they remembered watching the original video.
yeah, sure. Multiple users remembering this video completely lines up with how earlier on in the story, nobody seemed to know what the heck One Dude Reviews _ was going off about. But speaking of One Dude Reviews _, he apparently came back to the thread 10 days later to say,
Do not search for this S word anymore. This thread is dead. Stop looking.
which is kind of funny, but it's funnier how the story says,
Unsurprisingly, multiple users were confused to one dude's response, both due to the time it was posted, which was made at 11 p.m. when most users would be asleep.
really? A chronically online brony, no, not even that, an adult human being awake at 11 p.m.? That counts as a big shocker within the context of the story? Wait, who wrote this? Some young child who has the bedtime of 7:30? Well, it doesn't really matter. The story ends with the guy posting this in the thread, despite the fact that the story says that his account was suddenly deleted before this. And I get this might be going for, oh, how did he post it? His account is deleted. But the fact that this story tried really hard grounding itself within the realm of reality with all those fake screenshots worked really well in favor of it. But if this is a sudden shift to the paranormal, then that kind of defeats the impact of what it was building up to. And if the in-universe reason isn't paranormal, then I'd imagine it's the admins of the website trolling people in the thread. So I don't know, I think this would have probably had more impact if that image was posted in a thread before he deleted the account. But then again, at that point, literally anyone can get a picture of a face and add text to it and post it anywhere. So it's like this was an attempt to add some kind of dun ending, but just doesn't really work no matter how you look at it, in my opinion at least. Also, what do you mean you know where I sleep? My bed? What's next? You also know what I make phone calls on and where I cook my food too?
To this day, it's currently unknown what happened to One Dude Reviews _. Multiple theories propose that the account was simply a hoax created for some publicity stunt.
Well, that would be a terrible publicity stunt if the guy deleted his account and what he was talking about still hasn't been found.
While much of the content surrounding Fluttershy's cabin within the thread had been recovered, the story itself is still lost and the video itself has not been recovered aside from one screenshot. Feel free to respond if you find any updates or potential leads for the lost story. The Cloaked One.
Well, that one screenshot can probably get you far. It has the title of the video and channel name. What more do you need? Gah! Okay, as for my thoughts on this, I really like it. I know I went hard on it, but that's how I show my affection. First and foremost, this story was obviously formatted very differently from anything else we've covered so far, which already makes it miles more interesting. Not to say that every story needs a brand new format to keep me engaged. That would be stupid if that's what I was saying. What I am saying is, I don't know, a format change is cool every now and then. Plus, what actually helped with this one is that the subject matter, as in spooky internet stuff, is something that I'm interested in anyway. That is intrinsically already much more engaging to me than what's basically just some guy's self-insert AU story that drones on and on and on. Obviously, there were some serious, unforgivable leaps in logic in the story, as I pointed out, and yeah, I can't really defend those, but as what the story was, yeah, sure, I dig it. Now, the reason I was kind of hesitant to go deep into the background of the story before actually going over it is because due to the format and content this was written in and about, this is one of those stories that would have had so much more impact if we didn't know who it was authored by. As in, this story is almost super immersive, but because it's super obvious who it's written by, and you can just go ahead and see that it's written by an individual who posts other scary stories, that immediately gets rid of any spookiness or immersion. Let's just say, for example, your friend who says they've seen a ghost in real life. And let's say you are an individual who doesn't necessarily believe in ghosts. But if your friend is insistent they saw a ghost and gives you some circumstantial evidence or some details, etc., to make it slightly believable, you might eventually come around to, yeah, you know what, maybe this guy did see a ghost. But if every conversation after that point, that friend is always talking about how they saw an alien and then a Sasquatch and then the Loch Ness Monster after that, you're probably not even likely to believe in the first story anymore because they went on and on and on. What if they just left it with the first story? They may have convinced you. And that's how I see stories where the intention is to blur fiction and reality. Obviously, I think people who create work deserve credit, but I guess my point is, when it comes to writing stories like this, it's like, as an author, how committed are you to keeping the illusion of the mystery alive? But I guess that'll do it for this story. Or actually, this whole thing in general, because we're done. Conclusion. Okay. Well, because it's not like there's a through line between all these stories written by different people, and I've given an overview of my thoughts on each one, self-contained, it's not like there's some grand conclusion to draw here. Although, something we can comment on is how it was interesting seeing how the writers of these stories took the most innocent, seeming least capable of violence one of the main six and turned her into the opposite of that. Except, no, none of these stories really attempted that at all. As in, one was a meta story outside of characters, one was a troll pasta, and the other two, which is what we're looking for here, just starts the story off with Fluttershy already being deranged. But I understand if that sort of thing is better suited for long-form fanfics with actual chapters and not just one-shots like we looked through today. But hey, in the end, I did really enjoy reading these stories, and that's all that really matters at the end of the day. Alright then, if you made it all the way till the end of the video, I just want to give you a huge heartfelt gratitude, and also huge thanks to our channel supporters over at Patreon. Like I said at the beginning of the video, we started aiming our creepypasta deep dives to be about each individual character rather than just random ones. And judging by how it's already been a year since the last one that we did, yeah, I'm gonna have to start picking up the pace for this to really go anywhere. So feel free to comment down which of the main six, or really any character, you want me to cover creepypastas of next. And also feel free to point my direction to any particular stories if you've got any ideas, or want any stories you want my thoughts of. Preferably stuff from before 2015, because that's the era of stuff I'm the most passionate about, but obviously that's not a hard and fast rule. I'm just saying I'm more likely to be passionate about what I'm talking about if it's in that era, but it's not a strict rule or anything. Other than that, definitely let me know. Did any of these stories sound interesting to you? Did they all sound stupid? Anything in between? Let's get a discussion going. As for what's next for this channel, in a few days I'll be posting that Season 2 retrospective supercut video, which if you've already seen all the individual retrospective parts, there will be new information added in that one. Not just at the beginning and the end, but I actually did go back and re-edit some parts. So you are going to be getting a whole new experience for that, should you choose to watch it. So that's something to look forward to. But I think that's pretty much it for now. I'll see you guys then. F- out.